Good morning, everyone. This morning, our committee is going to embark on the Canada-Israel Free Trade Agreement. And before we get into clause by clause on that, we are very fortunate to have with us Minister Carr. Welcome, sir. As you're well aware, we're a very busy committee. We've accomplished quite a bit in the last couple of years. We've dealt with the European Agreement, TPP, and CPTPP, and the Pacific Alliance, the ASEAN countries, and of course one of the big ones was the whole North American Agreement. So we had studies also on the tariffs, the impacts of the tariffs of steel and aluminum, and today we're going to be doing the Canada-Israel Agreement. Very active group, and we've got lots more on our plate in the upcoming months. But thank you for coming with us, and you know the routine, and you got the floor, and then we got almost a whole hour with you, and
Great.
And we want to stay focused, of course, on the Canada-Israel. But you know, if an MP has another question that's pertinent and it's not too political and it's good to go, but I'd like to keep the questions when we start questions short and then the answers short, so we can get everybody to have a round. So without further ado, Minister, you got the floor.
Thank you, Chair, and I recognize that we are, after all politicians, so occasionally a question might be political, and that's fine with me. Let me start by thanking you all for the important work that you have done and that you continue to be. You say the plate is full, but the plate is full with some pretty terrific ingredients that make for a meal for Canadians, a meal from which there will be growth, there will be jobs for Canadians, and that is facilitated by the excellent work that you do. And if I can just say as an aside, how much I honor the role of parliamentary committees. You really are the guts of our parliamentary system. This is the place where politicians are held accountable. This is a place where the ideas are debated respectfully. This is a place where really the people of Canada can be well assured that the business of running our country is in the hands of accountable and, in the case of this committee, thoroughly competent and able parliamentarians. So let me start by thanking you for the very good work you do for our country. And also for the opportunity today to talk about Bill C-85, an act to amend the Canada-Israel Free Trade Agreement Implementation Act and to make related amendments to other acts. Canadians understand the importance of trade to our economy, and how much more important can it be than Canadians have seen it is over the last number of months. And for this reason, the government has pursued an ambitious trade negotiation agenda, the primary purpose of which is to diversify trade. So just to give a few examples of this, Chair, you've mentioned some of them. Just last month, Canada ratified the CPTPP with a speed reflecting the importance of this deal to farmers, ranchers, entrepreneurs, and workers across Canada. And on December the 30th, as members of the committee know, Canada will add Japan, Singapore, New Zealand, and Australia to our ever-growing trade network, with Vietnam joining the list early in the new year. And also, to pause there for a moment just to say how quickly this agreement made its way through the House of Commons and the Senate, which is a tribute to cooperation among parties and also the importance of moving it quickly, because we have a material advantage as a result of that speed that put us in the first tranche of 6 nations, which actually gives the wealth creators an advantage over others who didn't make it quite so quickly. So for all of your cooperation to make that happen, thank you again. And in September, the government announced it had reached an agreement with the U.S. and Mexico. Our ambition throughout these negotiations was to make sure that we had secure access to these markets, which are the most important markets in the world for us, and we achieved that goal. Also, in September, we marked a 1-year milestone of provisional application of the trade agreement with the European Union, the Comprehensive Economic and Trade Agreement, or CETA. And in this past year, Canada added $1.6 billion in increased exports to Europe and saw a 20% growth in container traffic at the Port of Montreal. We have a new agreement with Ukraine in place since 2017, and we are working toward ratifying a modernized and inclusive trade agreement with Chile, that will distinguish Canada as the first G20 country to adopt a gender chapter in a free trade agreement. The government is actively pursuing opportunities in other important and fast-growing markets and making inroads. Canada is in negotiations with our partners in the Americas, in the Pacific Alliance and Mercosur, and exploring possible negotiations with ASEAN. Taken together, we have 14 free trade agreements covering 51 countries, connecting us to 1.5 billion of the world's consumers. While market access is vital, alone it does not create jobs and prosperity for our people. Our businesses need the right tools to actively pursue international opportunities, especially in markets covered by our trade agreements. And that's why the Fall Economic Statement proposes an export diversification strategy to help grow Canada's overseas exports by 50% by 2025, with more help for small and medium businesses to help them explore new export opportunities. Just to pause for a moment, the metaphor, colleagues, I use is that these trade agreements are bridges negotiated by governments. But what has to cross those bridges are investment dollars, goods, services, and people. Government sets the stage, government helps build the platform, but it's the SMEs who create the growth and the wealth. And that's the partnership between government and the private sector that holds so much potential for us creating jobs so necessary for Canadians. Recently, I traveled to Asia, where I joined Finance Minister Morneau for the inaugural Canada-China Economic and Financial Strategic Dialogue. The discussions resulted in 48 tangible outcomes, including a commitment to modernize the WTO, strengthen cooperation on patents and trademarks, and cooperation in leading the global transition to a lower carbon economy. Canada also secured deals for the short term. Canadian businesses, Atlantic Premiers, and my colleague, Agricultural Minister Lawrence MacAulay, were prominent at the recent International Import Expo held in Shanghai. And our presence paid off to the tune of $1.67 billion in deals for Canadian businesses in life sciences, agri-food, aerospace, and transportation. Colleagues, I was just in Edmonton and Saskatoon, and while in Edmonton, celebrated a deal between the Edmonton International Airport and EHL for China, which will establish Edmonton as an important North American hub for e-commerce and the movement of goods between Canada, in fact, all of North America, and Asia. And this is a tangible outcome of the work that we have been doing and will result in both growth and in jobs. In addition to China, I accompanied our Prime Minister to Singapore to attend events surrounding the annual Association of Southeast Asian Nations, ASEAN, and their Leaders Summit. As members are aware, the ASEAN market is a significant one with a population of nearly 643 million people, with an ever-expanding middle class, representing the world's sixth largest economy as a group of 10 countries. The visit, my second since becoming minister, was an opportunity to highlight Canada's comparative commercial advantages, advocate for intensified exploratory discussions on a possible free trade agreement with ASEAN, promote Canada as an attractive investment destination and partner, as well as to mark the success in Southeast Asia of some of Canada's most innovative companies. Our efforts signal to the world that trade matters, that rules matter, and that we will not be drawn into the world of protectionism. Canada's commitment to the rules-based order is an essential strength, and we will put it to work for more Canadians. That's why I convened a World Trade Organization reform ministerial meeting in Ottawa last month, which resulted in a clear message of support for the rules-based multilateral trading system and a common goal to take urgent action to strengthen and modernize the WTO. We firmly believe our international trade relationships are mutually beneficial. And this is demonstrated in the modernized Canada-Israel Free Trade Agreement, or CIFTA. Since CIFTA first came into effect more than 2 decades ago, Canada's two-way merchandise trade with Israel has more than tripled, totaling $1.7 billion in 2017. Canada and Israel agreed in 2014 to modernize CIFTA, which at the time was a goods-only trade agreement. The result of those negotiations is an agreement that updates 4 of the original chapters, including market access, and adds 9 new chapters, including intellectual property and e-commerce. I pause here to acknowledge the work that was done by the previous government, by Ed Fast, and to say that that was very important work that built the platform upon which we have this now modernized agreement. I recognize that contribution to Canadian trade and thank you for it. We have negotiated rules that are designed to help address non-tariff barriers, to contribute to facilitating trade, to make more trade possible and predictable, and to cut red tape, reducing some of the costs to companies for doing business. Once in force, close to 100% of all current Canadian agriculture, agri-food, and seafood exports to Israel will benefit from some form of preferential tariff treatment, up from the current level of 90%. Meaningful market access for Canada's agriculture and agri-food processors was a key interest for these negotiations, and the government delivered, including unlimited duty-free access on sweetened and dried cranberries, current tariff 12%, baked goods, current tariff of up to 8%, and pet food, current tariff of 4%. These important tariff outcomes for the agriculture and agri-food sector place Canada on a more level playing field with exporters from the United States and the European Union, key competitors in this sector. They also give Canadian companies a leg up on competitors in other countries that do not have a free trade agreement with Israel. In exchange, Canada agreed to eliminate tariffs on certain targeted Israeli agriculture and agri-food imports, such as certain fish and certain nuts, some tropical fruits, and some oils. I want to reassure all honourable members and all Canadians that the modernized Canada-Israel Free Trade Agreement, like its predecessor, fully respects Canada's supply management system. I am pleased that the negotiated outcome has the support of key Canadian agricultural stakeholders, including Pulse Canada, Canola Council of Canada, Canadian Vintners Association, and companies involved in the processing of potatoes, cranberries, soybeans, and pet foods. An important aspect of the modernized CIFTA that aims to ensure these opportunities are more widely shared among Canadians is its forward-looking framework that includes new chapters, Mr. Chair, on trade and gender, small and medium enterprises, labor and the environment, as well as a new provision on corporate social responsibility. In this regard, the modernized agreement is a new forward-thinking partnership that reflects who we are as vibrant, diverse, open, and democratic societies. I had the opportunity to witness this firsthand during a recent visit to Israel. For those here today who may not know, Israel has a long-standing reputation for technological prowess with a well-developed scientific and educational base. We see room to expand and build partnerships in these sectors and many others. There are tremendous opportunities for Canadian companies in sectors such as aerospace, smart mobility, sustainable technologies, information communications technology, life sciences, and energy. When I was in Tel Aviv in September, I announced a pilot program to facilitate new cybersecurity solutions for the energy sector that will consider Israeli solutions to address the needs of Canadian natural gas delivery companies. And there are also great prospects for forging increased partnerships in joint research and development. Mr. Chair, I also visited Ramallah in the West Bank and had an excellent day of conversations with business leaders and government representatives. In Ramallah, we established the Canada-Palestinian Business Council for the first time and made a significant contribution to women entrepreneurs, and felt very satisfied that we had had that very important conversation with Palestinians in Ramallah. Canadian and Israeli firms have joined forces to develop an ultraviolet water monitoring system that ensures the safety of drinking water. And there are even more possibilities on the horizon that will change countless lives in communities around the globe. With so much potential and opportunity on both sides, it simply makes sense that we work together to deepen our partnership and continue to knit our economies ever more closely together. Canadians want to do more business in and with Israel in the years ahead. A modernized free trade agreement between our countries is a surefire way to help make that happen. Thank you, Mr. Chair. I welcome our conversation coming now.
Well, thank you, Minister. And you alluded to the SMEs, and just let you know, and you probably do know, our committee is doing a study right now on, with all these trade agreements, how small and medium-sized enterprises can take advantage and plug into these SMEs. So I welcome you to see the results. We have some really good presentations so far from many stakeholders and some good ideas for the government. So we're going to go to dialogue with MPs, and I'd like to welcome some visiting us, MP Tabera and MP Wagenthal and MP St. Marie. Welcome to our committee, and without further ado, we're going to start off with the Conservatives. Mr. Allison, you got 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and to Minister, thank you. Welcome in your new role. I realize now it's been over 4 months, and so it's great to have you here for the first time. And I also want to recognize your officials that are with you that I think always do excellent work on behalf of Canada. So thank you guys for what you do. We're obviously going to support this trade deal. So we'll just get that out of the way right now. Thank you for recognizing the work that our former minister did. And I'll do the same thing. I appreciate some of the things in the economic statement, not all of them, but obviously the accelerated capital cost allowance is important for business. We've heard that here. I think the increase in SIF funding, or the Strategic Innovation Fund, is good. The challenge remains still is that SMEs don't qualify for that. And as we've seen happen as a result of tariffs, specifically, while the Strategic Innovation Fund is good and helpful, it's only really good for larger companies. So I guess one of the questions I want to talk to you about is competitiveness, and that's always the challenge. I agree, you know, both our governments have been very similar in trade deals. I think it's important as we move forward, but I think the challenge still remains is that we lack a competitive advantage when it comes to a number of different issues in the economy. And the challenge I have right now is it's great that we have trade deals, but if we're not competitive at home, it makes it difficult as we move forward. And we can talk about the energy sector, there's a ton of things, but my concern is that the fact remains is that there's been major regulatory reform in the U.S. as well as tax reform. This is our largest trading partner. I'm not going to talk about carbon tax. I'll leave that to my partner. But I think that you know, one of the challenges I have is the fact that I think that we're not nearly as competitive as we need to be. So I'd like to offer you a quick comment on that, and then I have another comment on trade commissioners.
Competitiveness is extremely important, and it's across all sectors of our economy. That was recognized in the fall economic statement. You made reference to the accelerated capital cost allowance, which is very important. Interesting conversation, colleague, that I had with an international CEO, a woman, while we were in New York for the United Nations General Assembly. And I asked about where does Canada fit competitively internationally, because you're in the business of moving billions of dollars around the world. So when you look at Canada, what do you see? And her answer was very interesting. It was, well, on the regulatory and tax front, it's about a wash. You had an advantage over the Americans, but the Trump tax cuts kind of leveled that playing field. But your major competitive advantage in Canada is your immigration policy and your access to talent and your understanding that Canada's labor pool is not bound by Canadian borders, but it's the world, because there is an international competition for workers, not only skilled workers, colleagues, also for semi-skilled workers, even for unskilled workers, right across the requirements of a modern economy such as ours. So when you say competitiveness, let's not forget that there's also competition for talent internationally. And that's where Canada not only succeeds, but excels, and not only through the minds of Canadians, but those international entrepreneurs who are looking to invest in various countries. And it's also too important to say that it comes at a moment where Canada's inclusiveness is in contrast to the policy of other nations.
Thanks, Mr. Carr. The other question I have, Canadian Federation of Independent Business said is most, like 60% of their SMEs have never heard of Trade Commissioner Services. Now, we understand that's been sort of a reoccurring theme as we've talked to SMEs and done some of the stuff. What are you guys doing to help push that message out. And, like I said, I think one of the challenges, I think what our trade commissioners do and EDC, BDC, all great stuff. The challenge is how do we get this knowledge out to our SMEs so that we can take advantage of these trade deals?
I agree with the premise of your question. We haven't done well, and we have to do better. And how do you do better? Step one is to make sure that the SMEs know about these programs that we're offering for them. They don't. So the first order of business is to raise awareness across the country that we have these tools. Colleague, I can tell you it's $100 million over 6 years for CanExport, $17 million over 5 years to expand the Canadian technology accelerators, $10 million over 3 years for export readiness, $25.4 million over 5 years for digital IP. And there's more to $60 million over 5 years for Trade Commissioner Service digital presence. I could go on, but the point is that we're with you. And we would encourage all members to join the conversation about how imperative trade diversification is. Let me give you an example of what you can do as a member of Parliament.
Just we have to be quick, Minister.
What we can all do as members of Parliament is to hold town halls, to send out communication in our own ridings to businesses to say, by the way, this is what's available. We've had a conversation in our caucus. I would encourage you to have conversations in yours.
Thank you. We're going to go to Liberals now. Mr. Sheehan, you got the floor.
Well, thank you very much, Minister, and you certainly hit the ground running, literally. I've been watching your movement across this world, and you've been in many parts of the world promoting Canada, and I appreciate that very much. As you know, I'm from Sault Ste. Marie, and we're known as a steel town. That's our traditional-based business. However, through many years of efforts, we have also diversified significantly into areas of clean tech, into areas of innovation, technology. We have an innovation center. We have so many little small and medium-sized businesses working in the information technology business in clean tech. And we're a microcosm of what's happening, I think, in Canada as a whole. And I was very interested in seeing, your remarks about your trip to Israel. Could you maybe share with us some of your and delve into some of your experiences and meetings that you had in Israel as it relates to information technology, any business you met with that you thought were kind of interesting, clean tech, et cetera? Because we have places even like in Sault Ste. Marie with the Ontario Lottery Gaming Corporation, $2 billion corporation that deals a lot in, obviously, as we all know, different solutions related to online gambling, et cetera, but they also have a big security presence too as well. So if you could share that with us, Minister.
Israel is a leading nation in the world on startups. There have been books written about it. Israel is a startup nation. And it's a remarkable story of how, through a partnership between the chief scientist of Israel and the state with entrepreneurs, has led to such dynamic growth. And when we were there, we were so impressed by how that growth has developed into almost a national culture of pride that they have been able to lead the world. And we look for ways in order to deepen and broaden our own relationships with Israeli entrepreneurs and with Israeli scientists, and also to learn as a government of how public policy can facilitate that growth within the private sector. And there are chapters within SIFTA that will reflect that by further enhancing e-commerce, a chapter on e-commerce alone and on IP. So there's a recognition within the agreement of the importance of those kinds of technological transfers and learning from what the Israelis have done. But at the same time, while we were so impressed by what they have accomplished, they in turn were impressed by what we are accomplishing. And we see more and more, and I saw it as recently as the last few days in Western Canada, just how swiftly we are advancing in e-commerce and in IP. So there is a natural relationship between Canada and Israel on this file. And also, don't forget the importance of the people-to-people ties that actually go back historically right to the birth of the State of Israel. and the ties between Israelis and Canadians, which are very deep and continue to deepen. And that's also reflected on the environment within which the nations see ways in which they can cooperate. And a good example is within this deal itself.
And again, that's reflected in Sault Ste. Marie, a small little northern Ontario town. But of course, we have a synagogue, the Beth Jacobs Stag, so we have a very proud community up there. And in your remarks, you'd mentioned, and I just wanted to touch on a little bit of the CPTPP. In your remarks, you'd mentioned about being one of the first signatories, giving us extra ability. And I bring that up again because in Sault Ste. Marie we have Mana International that deals with organic agriculture, different varieties, in particular soybeans that they manage, and they're dealing in Japan for the last 20 years. They're dealing with Belgium, other places in Europe. So if you could explain to us what exactly was that advantage of us doing and getting this deal done expeditiously?
Answer, please.
Short answer is that it means there'll be 2 tariff reductions before other countries are even part of the agreement. The first comes on the 30th of December, and the second comes only a few days later when we're into 2019. That's the first advantage that we get, along with 5 other nations, in Vietnam has been the 7th. And that's why the work of this committee and of the House of Commons and the Senate was so vital to put us in the first tranche. And it's going to give our exporters significant advantage. And that's going to be measurable in the volume of trade, because there will be instant tariff reductions on December the 30th and a second set of reductions a few days later that will benefit the nations who were part of that first tranche. That's us. That's why it's important.
Thank you. And we're going to move over to the NDP now. Ms. Ramsey, you got the floor.
Thank you, and thank you, Minister, for being here. You mentioned tremendous opportunities, and there was an opportunity in this agreement, I think, to advocate for a peaceful 2-state solution between Israel and Palestine. But unfortunately, the SIFTA that you've presented to us is a missed opportunity in this way. And the European Union-Israel deal had provision, had language in there, and I'll read to you what it states between the parties. It talks about the provisions of the agreement itself, and it says, relations between the parties as well as all the provisions of the agreement itself shall be based on respect for human rights and democratic principles, which guides their internal and international policy and constitutes an essential element of this agreement. We have strong international commitments towards this from Canada. We've certainly signed on to several of them. And so I want to ask you, Minister, why the government didn't include a similar general line, at the very least, on human rights protections.
Thank you. You know that Canada is committed to a 2-state solution. That is our policy towards the conflict. We continue to be committed to that objective. We also are fully understanding that the impetus for a 2-state solution must come from the Palestinians and the Israelis, and that there are obstacles that are beyond the influence of nation states such as ours, but we stand ready to offer our help, as we have historically in the conflict.
Can I ask, Minister, why we didn't include the same language as the EU deal does?
Well, you know that the promotion and protection of human rights right around the world is core to Canada's foreign policy. This is a foreign policy decision, and that our government will always stand up for human rights, including women's rights, Indigenous rights, and the freedom of expression.
I just think there was a really great opportunity to do that, and in a non-controversial way, because this language already exists with one of our large trading partners, the EU. So I really need to specifically ask why we didn't include that in this agreement.
This is a foreign policy issue. You know of our commitment to a 2-state solution. You know that contained within SIFTA itself, there are path-breaking chapters on corporate social responsibility and on gender rights in an enforceable chapter negotiated for the first time. And we think that as Canadians, we can be
So I
very,
just-
very proud of those
I
accomplishments.
just want to be clear that you could include it in a trade agreement. There's precedent for it. It's been done before. So it isn't just a foreign affairs issue. It is something that's been addressed through a trade agreement with, I would say, one of our closest partners, the EU. So there is absolutely a space for that to happen in here. And my question really was why that hasn't happened. But maybe in the spirit of that, what I'll do is move a motion that I have here at the committee. That's my motion in regards to the committee study of Bill C-85, an act to amend the Canada-Israel Free Trade Agreement Implementation Act and make related amendments to other acts, that the committee invite witnesses to appear to discuss the state of human rights in Israel and the occupied territories of Israel. So I'll just put that forward, Mr. Chair, to move that right now, please, for a vote from the
Okay.
committee.
A motion is put forward. Is there any debate? So let's call a vote.
A recorded vote, please,
Recorded
Chair?
vote.
Yes, thank
Okay.
you.
Can the clerk read off the names?
Mr. Fonseca,
Against, no.
Ms. Ludwig,
No.
Mr. Peterson, Mr. Sheehan,
Against.
Mr. Tabara,
Abstain.
Mr. Allison,
No.
Mr. Carey,
No.
Ms. Wagendahl, Ms. Ramsey,
Yes.
Okay.
A bit of time? About a minute?
Yes, you do.
Okay,
Go ahead.
so
You got the floor.
my second question to you, the UN Security Resolution 2334 calls upon states to distinguish in their relevant dealings between the territory of the State of Israel and the territories occupied since 1967. Basically, this is our own policy, and this refers to labeling in the settlements, and we do have experience with this in Canada. So I'm wondering if you can tell me why, again, the European Union has labeling as part of their trade agreement, why that's not included in our trade agreement with Israel.
Well, SIFTA doesn't contain any commitments that are specific to labeling. Labeling falls under the purview of the Canadian Food Inspection Agency, as you know.
Ruled that we should have distinguished labeling in Canada.
Yes, colleague, and you
Just
also
have-
know.
Sorry,
that-
I'll have to wrap this up a bit, unless,
Yes, just one.
Go ahead,
I
sir.
appreciate the question.
Okay.
That the matter is now before the federal court for judicial review.
okay, thank you. And we're going to move on to Mr. Fonseca. You got the floor.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, Minister. And Minister, in your metaphor of the different trade agreements that we have across the globe now, was in terms of building these bridges. The bridges have been built, and now the fuel being put to those vehicles, those goods, services, et cetera, to be able to cross those bridges through the fall economic statement. And I'm glad we put in a lofty goal of 50% of trade diversification by 2025. We have heard from many of the different stakeholders that supporting SMEs as well as large business. And one of the thoughts that has come to the table is still that EDC, BDC, and our trade commissioner services are just not working as cooperatively and as well as they could. So they're not firing on all cylinders. So one of the recommendations came forward was, they don't have a CRM between themselves, so that if when you would have a small business that would knock on a door, you'd hope that the other entities would all know that business is looking for support, and they'd be able to kind of jump on and provide that support. Is that something that you see as a way forward to helping our SMEs?
Yes. And let me also agree with the premise of your question, as I agreed with the premise of my honorable friends to start off this round of questioning, and that is that we've got to do better. And the way to do better is to coordinate, as you have suggested in your question, to add more resources, which we have done through the commitments of the fall economic statement, and to be far more aggressive. One of the reasons why I'm not home as much as some in my family would like me to be is because that's what I'm doing, and I'm not the only one. And also to take special note of what many members of Parliament have done, including members around this table, which is to, in their own communications with their constituents, mostly their small business leaders to say, this is available to you. We have found ourselves in a very comfortable situation in our relationship with the United States. And these relationships go back, in some cases, years, other cases, decades. We speak the same language. It's culturally similar, although not identical. And now there is an understanding that there are these opportunities. Well, why are there opportunities developing now that haven't developed before? Because of the huge growth in the middle class in the developing world. Hundreds of millions of people, largely in the Asia-Pacific region, but in South America, I would argue also in Africa, and that these burgeoning middle classes will need our resources, human and natural. Many of them offered by Canadians competitively internationally. But they don't know that as well as we want them to. So I agree absolutely with your premise. We'll give you a fuller answer on exactly how we are directing our resources to ensure that we maximize what we believe is to be a moment of opportunity for Canada.
Thank you, Minister. Moving to directly to SIFTA. I know we have these strong people-to-people ties. We have a lot of business going on. Where we do very well with Israel is around research and development. So in the health sciences, in pharma, medicine, medical devices. Now, Israel does very well when it comes to commercializing its products and services. We do very poorly on that front. What can we learn is, I know that may be beyond this agreement, but how can we be able to kind of master that ability that Israel has here in Canada?
I think the way you handle that kind of question is to first of all find out where the alignments are and where the symmetries are, and to assess where a nation is doing things well and what best practices can be borrowed, and the ways in which we can take our strengths and combine them so that the whole is greater than the sum of its parts. And I think that's particularly true in the Canada-Israel trading relationship. The clean tech and high tech sectors are so well developed in part because that's also how their universities are adapting to these opportunities and their colleges. So there's a tremendous focus on education, and these institutions have become world leaders. We are, by the way, no slouches in Canada and are becoming stronger all the time. On AI, for example, just in Edmonton at the University of Alberta this week, more examples of how that research, along with what we see in Waterloo and in Toronto and elsewhere. And there are, in many cases, academic agreements and exchanges with Israel. There will be more. This agreement facilitates that.
Thank you. And we're going into another round. I think we have time for a couple more MPs, and we're going to start off with the Liberals. Madam Ludwig, you got the floor.
Thank you. Thank you, Minister and officials, for being with us today. I have two questions. I'm going to try to get them both in. As you know, Minister, I represent New Brunswick Southwest, which is a riding that's deeply involved with seafood, agri-food, and agriculture. And you mentioned in your opening remarks the removal of tariffs from Israel on fish, nuts, tropical fruits, and oils. And I'm wondering what a modernized agreement would mean in terms of benefits for Canadian exporters in my riding.
I think I have a specific answer to your question, colleague. The benefits for agricultural and agri-food sector, 92% of Canadian exports will enter Israel duty-free in unlimited quantities, up from 83%. So that's tangible. Those are the numbers. For the fish and seafood sector, 98% of Canadian exports will enter Israel duty-free in unlimited quantities, up from 90%. This means that Canadian exporters will be able to compete on a more level playing field with competitors from other countries, the U.S. and the EU. For Atlantic Canada in particular, the modernized SIFTA will result in benefits for the following export interest. I can go into detail if you want. Processed potato products, there are numbers, fresh apples, frozen vegetables, processed seafood, shrimp, fresh haddock and cod, all in the Atlantic region. So we'll make sure that you have a copy of this.
Thank you very much. I think that also, certainly literally feeds into, our government's commitment to the environment, because unless we have a strong environment to continue to grow, and manage and sustain our industries, particularly in the food sector, we will not be able to seize on these opportunities. Thank you.
Thank you.
You also mentioned in your remarks about the global competitiveness for immigration. And I wonder if you could speak directly to the access to international students and what that might mean to Canadian companies and to the Canadian economies in terms of a pool of talent.
We're hearing more and more about the importance of student exchanges. And as I travel, I hear it from not only the obvious places, which would be university administrators, but also from corporations. And there's another reason why this is important, because when young people experience other nations, they develop a respect for the people, the culture, and the values of those nations in which they find themselves as students. And the potential for utilizing that understanding and appreciation of those values as these students go on into their careers in professions and in business are so valuable for both the students and the countries involved. So you will have noticed a reference in the fall economic statement to a more mature relationship on post-secondary students and education, and the importance of becoming more aggressive internationally. That commitment is there. We intend to follow it.
Okay, thank you. I have more time, don't I?
Yeah, you got another minute, sure.
Great. We've certainly heard before this committee, as some of my colleagues have mentioned, the challenges for small to medium-sized enterprises, just becoming more aware of the services that are available. About 54% of businesses in Atlantic Canada are 1 to 4 employees. So in terms of taking advantage, where do you see the greatest opportunities for our really small businesses? How do we connect some of them to the supply chain, even in Canada on the domestic side?
I don't know that there is a one-size-fits-all answer to that question. Just in these last few days, meeting with startups in Saskatoon and Edmonton, this is a classic example of companies with 1, 2, 3, 4 employees that you're referring to. And there's a very limited awareness. The best way, I think, to inspire people to get interested is by example of other companies who have taken advantage of it, so that the narrative becomes real. One quick example. We were in Montreal when I was meeting with Cecilia Malmström, who is the Trade Commissioner of the EU. We visited a bicycle manufacturer in Montreal that had just won a competition to supply 7,000 bikes to Barcelona because of the European agreement. What are the two elements of the agreement that made them possible to win this competition? A reduction of tariff from 15% to 0, and the procurement chapter that allowed them to compete for government work. They won it, 7,000 bikes. So I was in the West, as I've told you, and I said to a bike manufacturer, do you know the story about how this Montreal bike manufacturer took advantage to CETA? No, we didn't.
Okay.
So that's an example of how through the narrative of similar companies in a sector or an industry, you can inspire them to look beyond to other export markets.
Thank you.
Just before Mr. Kerry, what's the number? How much trade do we do right now with Israel? Is there
1.7
both ways or
1.7 million.
total? Imports, exports?
Yeah. What's the? That's yeah, but what's the? We'll get that. It's 1.7 total. We'll get to the breakdown.
Okay, Mr. Kerry, you got the floor.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, Minister, for being here. And of course, you have our support. We're very much free traders. But I do want to talk about competitiveness. You mentioned today we seem to be competitive, but there's major policy changes coming, and I want your comments on that. Frankly, as well, your metaphor at the beginning, I found it a little insensitive. Oshawa, this week we found out that we're going to be losing 2,800 jobs, which means we're not going to be exporting anything from Oshawa. Bridges go both ways, not just one way. The United States is going to be losing 3,600 jobs, Mexico 0. And to put it into perspective, the Americans have 10 times our population. That would be like 28,000 jobs with the multiplier effect. And I think Mr. Trump would even be a little louder if that was the case. And frankly, businesses need clarity. And what I'm going to try to do is get some clarity from you today, sir. I know the Prime Minister, when we're talking about competitiveness, one of the biggest things we've heard around this table is about the cost of energy. He's committed to a carbon tax as his major way of getting to those commitments in Paris. The United States and Mexico doesn't have that same policy. And just last month, the United Nations reported that governments would need to impose up to $5,500 per ton of a carbon tax by 2030. $20 a ton is not going to do it. And business needs certainty. They need to understand what their costs are going to be, because companies don't invest billions of dollars in plants like for a 6-month investment. I know investments in the auto industry are going out to 2030. So very simple. I'm hoping that maybe we can reverse that decision in Oshawa. But I was wondering if you could just be very clear, when will your government be increasing the carbon tax to $5,500 per ton, or what are your proposed increases so business can know?
Well, that's a lot of questions
Last
that,
one, Minister, just
that
when
are
will you
directly
be
related to
increasing the carbon tax?
SIFTA, but I'm glad to answer them anyway. First of all, we are deeply disappointed in the decision that General Motors has taken. Our line of communication to the company is open to look at possibilities of making that plant viable continuously. Minister Baines has said that publicly. We continue to believe that an ongoing conversation with the company is important, and we make that offer. On the issue of a price on pollution, if someone is trying to make a link between a price on pollution and the closure of the Oshawa plant, then they're going to have to address the closure of 3 American plants at the same time.
Well, as I said, I'm not actually trying to make that direct link right now. What I just want to know is business wants certainty. And as you said, right now it appears we're fairly competitive. GM just shut down their premier plant. In other words, it's a award-winning plant. The employees did everything they needed to do. You do have a policy. The American plants are consolidating, and like I said, their job losses are significant, 3,600. But to put that into perspective, they're 10 times bigger than us. So that would be like 28,000 jobs in the United States. You have this unique policy in North America with the carbon tax, and the United Nations, which your Prime Minister has been very clear, he believes that that's really important, and overall competitiveness in all of our agreements, Israel, USMCA. This decision happened just after USMCA was made. We had the economic update. Obviously, it wasn't enough to keep this plant viable here in Canada. So the simple question is, when will you be increasing the carbon tax so business has certainty for these long-term investments? And if you can't provide that today, sir, if you could give us the schedule and just send it to the committee here so that we would know how these increases are going to be occurring over the next few years. Because business does need to know inputs, and this carbon tax is a significant new policy that the Americans and the Mexicans don't have.
Colleague, you are linking it. You are linking a price on pollution on this decision, and you're linking the decision from GM on the timing of the Canada-Mexico agreement, U.S. agreement.
What I'm asking is,
But you know the answer to your question. There
No,
is
I
a
don't.
schedule of the Pan-Canadian Framework decision on the price of pollution. It's $10, $20, $30, leading to $50 a ton by 2023.
But
I mean,
Minister,
but
20,
you're-
that's 23, but the United Nations report, which the Prime Minister holds in great regard, says it has to be up to 5,500, and that's to 2030. So that's what I'm asking, because business needs certainty.
you know, yeah.
And we'd like to see, when are you going to put it up to that price? Because that is significant competitive difference between
Sorry,
our
we're-
country and other countries.
We're out of time. We're going to have to cut it off there, and we got time for one more MP, and I think they're splitting the time, right? Mr. Peterson, you got the floor.
Sure, thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm going to share my time with MP Tabara here. I just want to talk a little bit about something unique in the amended agreement here, and that's the corporate social responsibility article. What obligations does Canada have under that new provision, and how does that align with our trade approach internationally?
The importance of corporate social responsibility is becoming an increasingly important conversation among nations. We think that this agreement moves that forward more aggressively than any of the agreements. It's important that to our government that Canadian companies around the world respect the values and the laws that are so important to us here in Canada. So we're moving forward on the process to do a better job of holding Canadian companies overseas to account. We're moving forward with the appointment, as you know, for the first ever ombudsperson for corporate social responsibility to help reflect our core values to the world and to deliver on our trade agenda. Having corporate social responsibility within this agreement, this CIFTA agreement, will encourage companies to follow responsible business practices while incorporating internationally recognized principles and guidelines. So that's how it's referred to directly within CIFTA. And then there's the broader issue of the commitment of the Government of Canada to appoint an ombudsperson, and that process is well along the way.
Okay, thank you. And I have one more question, and I think there'll be enough time for my colleague. You alluded in your opening comments the innovative nature of the Israeli economy. And I'm just wondering how you think through CIFTA, if we can sort of promote partnerships in the clean tech and high tech sectors, and this amended agreement a good mechanism to do so.
There are chapters within the agreement that promote these kinds of exchanges. There are people-to-people relationships. There are institution-to-institutional relationships. Even in my own province of Manitoba, there's quite a well-developed relationship between our universities and universities in Israel on water management. And there is a very serious high-tech, clean-tech component to the management of water. I think that the Israelis have a lot to learn from Manitobans and vice versa. So what these trade deals do, again in the metaphor of bridge building, is it makes it easier for these institutions and these companies to take advantage of each other because of the facilitation that these agreements offer. And in clean tech in particular, there is an awful lot of learning to happen both ways.
Okay, thank you, Minister. And Mr. Charles. My colleague can have
Thank you, Minister, for being here. And you've talked about the high-tech sector, and I come from a region, Waterloo region, which is a big high-tech hub. Israel has grown their high-tech sector, and it's increased their GDP 4% per year. In my region, we have Communitech, which is a tech company that attracted $391 million in 2017. That's a 14% increase in 2016. And you've mentioned that previously you were the resource minister, and I believe the best resources are our people. And we've attracted a lot of people in our region for the high-tech sector. There was 1,100 open positions to be posted online and to be filled. How can we, and it's alluding to my colleague's question, is how can we increase this bridge gap in the high-tech sector, and how can we learn from one another, and how can we increase our GDP going forward?
Well, I think the easiest way is to just get on a plane, dare I make that suggestion, and have a look. I mean, there have been trade missions, many, and the Israelis always welcome trade missions to Canada. But at the same time, I don't think that we should diminish or depreciate how far we've come in this sector in Canada, and you know yourself, colleague. And the Israelis are noticing that too. And there are more and more academic exchanges and more combined research projects. But what interests me most about this is the role of government in stimulating that kind of research and creativity. And we are taking measures across the Government of Canada to do exactly that. And it's the relationship between public policy, academic institutions, and the dynamic entrepreneurial sector. And the mix within that relationship that is the right one within the circumstances of any nation state that leads to these good results. The Israeli national situation is not identical to Canada's, but there are a lot of similarities, and understanding where those similarities are and how we can learn from, you give the, 4% a year growth, and why that 4% a year growth is able to take root are lessons that we can learn. This agreement, these relationships, these academic institutions, these joint partnerships all lead to taking full advantage of what we can learn from each other.
Thank you. And that wraps up the time with the MPs, and that wraps up our first half hour here, hour here this morning. Thank you for coming, Minister, and your officials for coming with you, and we look forward to more agreements. Take care.
Thank you.
Oh, we're going to suspend just for 5 minutes, and then we're going to go back at it. We're going to,
Just 1 minute. Mr. Chair, in this place, when we work, life is so busy. There's always some people, some of us, face health issues. Yesterday in the BC caucus, we had one member that had to be taken by ambulance to the hospital. It makes us all aware. We lost some members. But food is very important. I mean, when I look at this committee, I want to give a vote of thanks to the clerk, Christine LaFrance, for the great work that she does. It's not only the technical part, but when it comes to taking care of us from the diet perspective, an excellent. So thank you, Christine.
thank you for Mr. Dhaliwal, and I think we're also passing that down the chain, whoever prepares a meal, even so far as the farmers that grew it. So it's all good. So we're going to continue. We have on our agreement with Israel. We had the minister here, and I think we have 12 clauses. But before we start, I think Mr. Kerry has a word. But before you start, you had a big week, sir. And it's hard on your community, and it's hard on as an MP when you lose that many jobs. And so anyway, from the committee to you, hang in there.
Well, you know what, Mr. Chair, I want to thank you for personally reaching out and talking to me earlier in the week, because this is devastating for our community. Families, we're looking at 2,800 families that are going to be affected by this announcement. So I think it's really important that we look at this more, because GM made this decision. This is an award-winning plant, but it's not going to have any product allocated to it after 2019, which effectively jeopardizes the future production of this plant for sure. I was happy to hear the Minister of Innovation, Science and Economic Development say that all options are being examined. And so my motion, I'd like to give the notice of motion. Pursuant to Standing Order 1082, the committee immediately undertakes a study concerning the automotive industry in Canada and details of all options of the federal government's plan to defend the Canadian automotive industry and the ability to defend Canada's competitiveness globally, that the Minister of Innovation, Science and Economic Development appear, and that the committee report its findings to the House. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Kerry, and that's you're just tabling the motion. And so we're going to continue on. And so, as we've done many, of course, many agreements here at this committee, so everybody at this table seems to know how it rolls, and we'll go from clause to clause. And I think we're going to start off with. Do I have this? One, shall clause 1 carry? Okay. Shall clause 2 carry? Now, we're going into clause 3. And in clause 3, we have 3 amendments, I guess, from the NDP. I think, Ms. Ramsey, they're your amendments, and
Yes.
you're aware that previously that it's been notified that they're not admissible. Those first 3 clauses?
Just one second, please, Mr. Chair.
I think you have to move
Yeah.
them, and then I have to rule on them, I guess. So sorry about that. So you go
Well,
ahead.
I'd like to move the amendment, and I'd like to speak to it. So this is quite an extensive amendment. If you look at NDP 1 amendment, it's about clause 3, and it's NDP 1, yes, NDP 1. So if you look at it specifically, it really is about some additions to be put into this space. So following A, we'd like to see, well, first of all, I think addressing A, adding A1. A is really an aspirational statement, and these are often included in the beginning of implementing legislation. But we'd really like to see some real goals. And so I think if we were to have an addition of A1, which is on the NDP 1 there, to read that it will substantially increase investment opportunities in Canada and the State of Israel while preserving the right of each of the parties to the agreement to regulate to achieve legitimate policy goals. This also really does speak to the any type of investor state or any type of dispute resolution, just really laying out the fact that we still retain the ability to do what we need to do in Canada, and that in Israel it's the same. So there's the addition of this A1 that would follow right after A at the bottom of the page there on number 1. And then if you flip over the page, the next one, replacing line 7 on page 2. And what it currently says there, you know, that we ensure a high level of environmental protection through comprehensive and legally binding commitments. So it's always positive, I think, to see agreement on the, or language on the environment in trade agreements. But what we do know is that again, this is like largely aspirational. We haven't really been able to address the issues of the environment in an enforceable way in trade agreements. So I think that, you know, an inclusion there about Canada's obligations under the Paris Agreement that was reached really just kind of lays out exactly where Canada is at in terms of our international obligations and commitments that we've made, so that there's nothing in the agreement that would kind of challenge our ability to be able to honor those commitments that Canada made in Paris in December of 2015. And I think, again, like, this doesn't alter the spirit of the agreement whatsoever or anything, this legislation. But this would really be something that would speak specifically to our commitment, which I think we all agree on, and we know that we've signed on to the Paris Agreement. But again, we don't want anything to ever be able to come back on us for implementing our obligation to the Paris Agreement. So it's a little bit of a, you know, a special nod and being very specific, which I think in trade agreements is very important. If we're not specific, things are open to interpretation. And so, you know, they aren't maybe things that we can address at a later date if the need arises. The third one that I have there, so this is on lines 8 and 10. So again, you know, what's there in the B talks about our international commitments and the State of Israel on labor matters. Again, it's very, like, this is very thin language. And I think that it could be fleshed out in a way that really indicates where Canada is at. And so my amendment there that I have put forward, it just essentially reiterates our commitment. And so the amendment is to protect, enhance, and enforce workers' rights through mandatory mechanisms recognized by the International Labor Organization's 8 core conventions and adherent to its decent work agenda, through the creation of independent labor secretariat with the power to oversee the dispute settlement process for violations of labor rights, to enforce penalties upon the violators, and through strengthening cooperation between Canada and the State of Israel. This is really important because to date, there haven't been any trade agreements that Canada has signed on to, or internationally, to be fair, when they speak about labor matters or labor rights that have been enforceable, that have been a way to actually address the situation that exists for working people. And so again, just fleshing this out and talking about the fact that we want these mandatory mechanisms in there, I think is very key. And if we are to build upon trade agreements, we have to start improving the language in them. If we keep repeating the same language of the previous trade agreements, then, you know, essentially we know in terms of labor, there's nothing enforceable. There's been a case brought that was dismissed. So, you know, we really need something here that if there is a labor issue that comes between our two countries, that there's a meaningful way to address it versus just saying, you know, that we build on these respective commitments. We need to honor our international commitments, not just build upon them. So I do, you know, bring that forward. And if we move on to D, which is on the second page of the amendment, And if you look there, this references line 10. So an addition after line 10. And the addition is to facilitate due diligence measures and ensure they're available for Canadian companies and funding agencies to create a framework for transnational bargaining to allow unions to represent workers in Canada and the State of Israel. So again, we really agree with the CLC that the Government of Canada has to look at due diligence of Canadian companies and funding agencies if we're going to create this framework. And again, this is something that is being called for as an addition to trade agreements in terms of labor, where we're going forward, to make sure that it's meaningful and that it's enforceable. So, it's the Canadian Labour Congress that is in agreement that this measure should be included in all trade agreements. And again, doesn't, I think, break the spirit of this agreement in any way. So if we go on to page 2, lines 11 to 16, what we're looking for there is a replacement. So we would be replacing lines 12 to 16 with the following text. Economic empowerment and immediately undertake an annual gender-based analysis and a gender impact assessment to be applied to the entire agreement, as well as to ensure the use of enforceable corporate social responsibility standards and principles as set out in the United Nations document entitled Guiding Principles on Business and Human Rights, which was published in 2011. So again, this is something we've heard pretty consistently at this committee around gender language, that if it's to be meaningful, it has to be applied throughout the entire text of the FTA, not just being relegated to one chapter. And we heard this from Oxfam, we heard this from other groups around previous trade agreements about the way forward in making sure that we are, having a meaningful impact on the lives of women. And the current way that we're writing text doesn't actually ensure that. And so, this is a fleshing out of that text. Again, the gender equality shouldn't only be concerns of women entrepreneurs and business owners. It should actually help systemic discrimination in women who work, who are in the labor force. And, there's nothing actionable here about that either. And the other thing that we really strongly believe, and I think we've heard at this committee too, when we're looking at improving language, we shouldn't have to wait 5 years for a review to see what the provision will yield or what it will not yield. The nature of our trade is happening every single day. So why we would wait a whole 5 years to figure out whether something's working or not just seems like a very lengthy period of time. So I put that out there, that we need some concrete steps and some actions. And I want to speak a little bit about the corporate social responsibility chapter.
You're still on your first amendment, right?
Yeah.
So I can encourage you to minimize it, because we have a lot of amendments to do today, and so I can't cut you off, but I'll encourage, because I like to go through the other ones and make sure you
I appreciate your attempt, but
have a say. So
all right,
you can wrap it up. I appreciate it.
So corporate social responsibility is something that I think we all agree needs to be part of our trading relationships with other countries. The problem is, if we make this voluntary, the system isn't working. It's not addressing the issues that we have. And, the OECD already agreed with the UN on these principles, and they're looking at ways to make them enforceable. So, this really is something that we have to do. And, Mr. Chair, just as a side, we have the corporate social responsibility ombudsperson who hasn't been appointed yet. So I know that it's something that the government is working on, but we really need someone in that role. I mean, at this point, we really don't have anything or anyone who's overseeing and making sure that the corporations are being held responsible. But again, I think if it was something that was mandatory as opposed to voluntary, then corporations, we wouldn't need an ombudsperson to oversee it. I mean, we need an ombudsperson currently because it's up to them whether or not they want to, honor the obligations and commitments that Canada has, certainly globally. So I really do think that, this is a space for us to, again, remove the voluntary from this so that we're putting some responsibility on corporations instead of just some, aspirational things that they could do if they felt like doing it. So I put that forward in my first amendment. And I think all of the things that I've raised are really things we've discussed here at this committee. We've heard consistently from witnesses at the committee. You know, I don't believe violate the spirit of the agreement.
Okay, so my recommendation here, it's inadmissible because it requires a roll recommendation because there's a cost to this. So this is not admissible to even put forward. And for the following,
Can I ask for some?
just let me finish, if I may. The following amendments, way we do it is the MP says the amendment, and then I say if it's admissible. And then if it's admissible, then the MP can speak on it. So for now on, whoever MP wants to do an amendment, state it. If it's admissible, we go forward. So that's the ruling on this first one.
Wait, I want to ask a question though. Which part specifically is inadmissible in the amendment? Can I get some clarification? Because is it that all of the additions that I've put in here or the changes are inadmissible, or are there specific ones?
Technically, I mean,
inadmissible?
I think when you read it, when you ask for a creation of an independent labor secretariat,
Okay,
that
so
requires
one?
money. So then that makes the whole amendment inadmissible. So let's move on to, if you can state your next one.
Okay, where am I at?
NDP 2, Clause 3.
Yes. Okay, just one second. Sorry, Mr. Chair. Okay, so this is an addition that I'm seeking here, and this is about the provisions of the Act and the agreement to
You understood
comply-
me. You're going to
I'm reading.
read the amendment. Okay, go
That's what I'm
ahead.
doing. That the provisions of this Act and the agreement must comply with the United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples. And 2, relations between the Government of Canada and the State of Israel, as well as the implementation of the provisions of the agreement itself, shall be based on respect for human rights and international law.
Thank you. And this one is also inadmissible because it could create new obligations on the Government of Canada and subjecting the treaty to the United Nations Declaration of Rights of Indigenous People. So that one's not going to go forward. So we move on to NDP 3.
Okay, so there's an addition here that I'm proposing, 4.1. In the interests of transparency, product labeling must accurately reflect the precise place of origin of any product that originates in an area that is occupied by the State of Israel, but that is outside the territory of the State of Israel as it existed on June 4th, 1967. In particular, labeling must indicate whether the product was made in an illegal settlement and whether it was made in the West Bank, East Jerusalem, Golan Heights, or Gaza. And again, this is from the EU language.
We got it. So I have to rule again it's inadmissible as it's beyond the scope of the bill since it addresses details of regulations related to labeling of goods, not a vision in the bill. So that being said, for the 3, should Clause 3 carry? Okay. So now we're going to go to Clause 4. And before I go to Clause 4, the block, welcome, sir, again. And you have some short comments on your amendment.
Merci, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you, Chair. First, I'd like to talk about the admissibility of my amendment. I feel that it respects all the criteria set out in pages 770 to 775 of Bosque and Gagnon. You will agree that it does not expand the scope of the bill. In fact, it does the opposite. My amendment does not violate the principle of the bill. The House adopted the principle of a Canada-Israel Free Trade Agreement, and my amendment seeks to ensure that we have a free trade agreement with Israel, an agreement that covers totally, but also exclusively, the territory of the State of Israel. Yes, it does add a new paragraph, but this does not in any way expand the scope of the bill. It is at report stage that we can do nothing but delete articles. It does not exceed the scope of the bill. Rather, it specifies the scope of the bill. That is all. In the same way, my amendment does not modify or amend the treaty. We all understand that a treaty is negotiated by two parties, and it can only be modified by two parties, but it can be interpreted. We can do this, and it's even a rather current practice. I would like to give you two good examples of this. For the first example, I will draw your attention to the North American Free Trade Agreement Implementation Act. In Section 7.1, which reads as follows, nothing in this act or the agreement, except Article 302 of the agreement, applies to water. There was nothing about water in the NAFTA text. And since it is not specifically excluded from the agreement,
You just stated you were only supposed to speak of your amendment, say your amendment,
okay.
and then I have to make a ruling if it's admissible.
OK.
So you've
Bon,
already spoken.
justement, je voulais,
You've already
très bien.
stated your amendment.
Bon, que le projet...
Are you getting my translation?
Oh, I hear you well.
So, okay.
he's going to read it. He's going to read
So if you can read your amendment, and then
Oui.
I'll make a ruling if it's admissible.
Très bien.
Go ahead.
Donc, que le projet de loi...
that Bill C-85 in Clause 4 be amended by adding after line 18 on page 2 the following, 6.1, for greater certainty, despite paragraph B of the definition territory in Article 1.7 of the agreement, this act and the agreement apply to the territory of the State of Israel except for any territory administered by that state since June 4th, 1967.
Well, thank you, sir. But the ruling says here that the amendment is inadmissible as is beyond the scope of the bill since it aims to determine how the definition of territory is understood in the treaty and in the bill. So that's the ruling on it. So it's not admissible. So, but we have another one here from NDP4. So we're going to move over to NDP4. And Madam Ramsey, you go ahead.
So this is about the non-application of the agreement to water. And this is a change being made from the language that's there that exists right now, and it's expanding that scope out a little bit. So this would add, lines 18 to 21, clause 4, this would replace line 21. So gaseous or solid state, and nothing may authorize the bulk export of water or the treatment of water by labeling or otherwise as a commodity. And so this is something. Are you going to rule?
You finished? Yeah, you're finished. So it is admissible. So
Thank
if you
you.
want to say a few comments on it, and then we can move on.
Yeah, so this is really reflective of, again, expanding that scope of understanding of water, and it's something that we saw addressed in the USMCA. The concern really is that these are kind of bottled water loopholes that are concerning, and we want to make sure that there isn't a way for bulk water to be extracted from Canada, to be, removed in any way. So if we're really specific about the way that water could be exported, then I think, that it would help. And Canadians are very, very, very supportive of, protecting and keeping our natural resources of water very healthy here in Canada. We see a lot of different initiatives for that. And so this really just expands a bit of that language to make sure that there isn't a way for Israel in this particular case, but any country really, to be able to have water being exported. And, we know that Israel is certainly it's a desert, and so they may have water concerns in the future. And it's just a very important resource to Canadians that we would want to protect, and all natural water being exempt is very important. But this was really a specifically worded exemption, and we have to make sure that it means that any water would be included in there. So I just bring forward that amendment for the committee.
Thank you. And is there any comments or questions on this amendment? Go ahead, sir.
Can you just restate in sort of like one sentence exactly what the goal of the amendment is?
So the goal of the amendment is to prevent bulk water exports. From Canada, yeah. The goal of the amendment is to make sure that we're entirely clear about the definition of water, to prevent bulk water exports in any way, whether it's bottled or whether it's, in a container.
Okay, any more comments, questions? If not, I'm going to bring it to a vote.
Recorded vote, please,
Yeah,
Chair?
sure. Okay, we're going to start, I guess we'll go around and you just say yay or nay. Go ahead.
No, I'll do the vote.
Go ahead.
Mr. Dhaliwal?
Sorry, I had a comment, sorry.
Yes.
Nay.
Nay.
Contre. I was
Mr.
gonna make a
Fonseca?
comment, but already-
Nay.
Ms. Ludwig?
Nay.
Mr. Peterson?
Nay.
Mr. Sheehan?
Nay.
Mr. Ellison?
No.
Mr. Nuttall?
No.
Ms. Ramsey?
Yes.
Defeated. So we go back to shall clause 4 carry. Okay. Now we're going to clause 5, and we have a few changes there. And I think we're NDP. Ms. Ramsey, you got NDP 5. Do you?
I do. So this is about the powers of the Minister for International Trade. So I'm proposing that we add a new clause. It's 12.12.1 after the existing 12.1. For consultation purposes, the name of each individual whom the minister proposes to appoint under Section 12 must be published in the Canada Gazette, Part 1, for at least 90 days.
Okay, it's admissible to enter it as an amendment. So you have any more comment, or it's pretty self-explanatory?
Yeah,
or-
I mean, I think this is really about transparency, and this would make the membership of the tribunals and the panels more broad-based and accountable. It's something that, we're always trying to achieve, to have Canadians understand and to have more transparency across the board on who we're appointing to particular positions. And we really do oppose that the minister has this exclusive power to appoint representatives, panelists, and chairpersons. So, we think that these decisions should be taken in consultation with a set number of days and with the Canadian public being aware of them. And again, this is just pure transparency from the government, and, it does not alter the spirit of the agreement. It's actually only something that would be an obligation here within Canada. And I would think that people who would want to serve now as ministers of the Crown or in the future of ministers of the Crown would be concerned about transparency and Canadians knowing that the process is open and accountable.
Thank you. Is there any more comments or questions on this one? So, let's have a vote on it.
Vote, please.
Yep.
Mr. Dhaliwal?
No.
Mr. Fonseca?
Nay.
Ms. Ludwig?
No.
Mr. Peterson? Mr. Sheehan?
Against.
Mr. Ellison?
No.
Mr. Carey?
No.
Mr. Nuttall? Ms. Ramsey?
Yes.
Okay, it's defeated, and we have, the next one is NDP 6. Ms. Ramsey, you want to state your amendment?
Yeah, so again, this amendment is really about who pays for certain things. It's about the remuneration and expenses. So what I'm proposing here is to replace lines 14 to 16 and replace it with the following. So 14 would be replaced with the Government of Canada is to pay its appropriate share of the costs of, and A would be replaced with the remuneration and expenses payable to its members. MEM, because it's the end of the line.
Yeah, it's admissible.
Yeah.
So if you have any more comments, go ahead.
So again, this is something that, I've discussed in other trade agreements, so I'm sure it's not a surprise to have committee members see it. And I did have the support of the Conservatives previously on this, because we're talking about, the public purse. We're talking about an accounting of where money is going and who it's going to. And we really, again, are just talking about transparency. And this is about publishing Canada's share of the commission expenses. And we think that the government really should be tabling a report to discuss these expenses, because these are things that often parliamentarians will have to dig around a little bit to find, and it should be an open and transparent process that when we're spending public tax dollars, there should be an accounting of how we're doing that. And I just think that Canadians have an expectation of us. And the expectation is that we're using their money wisely. And this would be a way for them to see how much money is being spent in international agreements, which I think is a question that, is something that's of interest to all of us, to find out what exactly the administration of these trade agreements ends up costing Canadians.
Thank you. And is there any more comments or questions on this? I don't see any. So we're going to have a vote on it. you require,
Recorded, please.
or, okay.
Mr. Dhaliwal?
No.
Mr. Fonseca? Ms. Ludwig?
No.
Mr. Peterson?
No.
Mr. Sheehan? Mr. Ellison? Mr. Carey?
No.
Mr. Nuttall?
No.
Ms. Ramsey?
Yes.
So it's defeated, and now we have NDP 7, and go ahead, you got the floor again, Ms. Ramsey.
Okay, so again, this is really an addition here, an amendment, and it begins at adding after line 23. And so what we're really looking for here, and I'll read it out to you first. Addition, that the Government of Canada shall, as soon as possible after the end of each fiscal year, prepare a report that A, identifies the members' assistants, and independent experts, and indicates the cost incurred by each member and their assistants of the panels, committees, subcommittees, working groups, expert groups, and other bodies, as well as the costs incurred by independent experts. B includes a gender impact assessment of the agreement. C includes an economic impact analysis with a detailed jobs analysis of the potential benefits and costs of the agreement. And D includes an analysis of the impact of the Act on human rights in Canada, in the State of Israel as it existed on June 4th, 1967, and in the territories occupied by the State of Israel, including Palestinian territories. And then 2, the Minister of Labour shall cause the report to be tabled in each House of Parliament on any of the first 15 days on which that House is sitting after the day on which the Minister receives it.
Well, it's admissible. Any more comment on it?
Yeah, I mean, there's quite a bit of comment on this, because at this trade committee, we spend a lot of time talking about the impact of trade agreements, but we don't actually have the government doing its own analysis of trade agreements and the effectiveness of them. So we'll often see outside groups that come forward. We just had the National Bank come forward on CETA, telling us that we've had a 46% decrease in exports over a 10-month period in signing the agreement. But again, we don't have any government analysis on this. So if we had a government analysis, it would be helpful to us to be able to understand. And, the first part really talks about the costs incurred, again, being fiscally responsible, being accountable to the amount of money that we're spending, whether we're seeing return on our investment for the money that we're spending in these trade agreements. And each agreement would certainly be unique in that way. In this particular agreement with Israel, we have quite a trade imbalance. They actually, we import a great deal more than we export to Israel. So it would be an understanding of how much we're spending in order to be able to see the benefits of the trade agreement. Because, the signing of the agreement doesn't end our obligations to it. They continue on in costs, they continue on in committees, people having to meet. And the gender impact assessment, again, I just go back to this one, because if this government, who professes to be feminist, is going to address gender issues in a meaningful way, then we have to do so in a way that's reflective of what is being asked for in international circles. And the thing that's being asked for is a gender impact assessment of the whole agreement. Again, not just this chapter that exists, but a lens on the entire agreement is the only thing that will ever address the issue of gender in trade agreements. And an economic impact analysis. I think this is pretty self-explanatory, with a detailed jobs analysis. How is it that we keep signing trade agreements and not reflecting back on the impact of them? Are we actually gaining jobs? In what sectors are we gaining jobs? Are we losing jobs? And who's being impacted? There's a lot of talk out there about sectoral trade, because of the way that trade is impacting different sectors in a very real way. Manufacturing and ag are often pitted against each other in trade agreements. So if the government is, professing that the trade agreements and the opening of markets will actually have an impact, and we'll see some benefit of trade out of that, then really the question is, how do we analyze that? How do we quantify that? How do we put that down in a way that Canadians can understand? And I think that having an economic impact analysis before we enter into trade agreements is also something very beneficial to give us an understanding. We saw that in the CPTPP from the government, and didn't have the best economic forecasting included in their own analysis. But the jobs in particular, listening to my colleague talk about the job losses in Oshawa, talking about manufacturing and how they've been disadvantaged in trade agreements, that if we have a way to actually understand how trade agreements are impacting jobs, then there's a conversation to be had with working people across our country on that impact. So I think it's something that's very important and should be a primary goal of this committee, to be honest. And obviously on the human rights, we aren't living up to our international commitments in this agreement. And there's a path there for us to do that. We could have simply put the language in that the EU included, who, that hasn't been controversial. It didn't cause any major ripples across Israel or in their relationship with them. And I think it was the responsible thing to do, to be a leader on human rights. And, this is something that Canada aspires to do, but it's also something that Canada has committed to do and to recognize. So to not see that included, I think we should have an analysis on the impact of this act of trade on human rights, because it's often being held up now by the Liberal government as something that they would like to see addressed in trade agreements, but it's my experience here is they've yet to do so meaningfully or really, quite frankly, at all. And we've seen this in other agreements as well, where there is an opportunity for Canada to really play a leadership role in the way that that we know that Canadians want us to do globally. And, as we look to China, there are certainly human rights issues in China and in ASEAN countries that really should be addressed. And at the very least, if we're not addressing them in the trade agreements, as the Liberals have failed to do here, then that there's a reflection back on how are we doing? What is the human rights condition in the country? Has trade had any impact on that? And so that just simply calls on that, and it calls on the Minister of Labour specifically to do that. So, again, I think this particular amendment speaks to a lot of the work that we do here and a lot of the things that we hear from our witnesses on a consistent basis in the public space. So if we are, as a trade committee, to try to find a way to address them, this amendment is an opportunity to do that. And so, I would invite my colleagues to support the work and efforts that we've had here. And I don't think this goes against the spirit of the agreement in any way. I don't think it's something that would harm our relationship. Again, it's just a domestic thing for Canada to understand trade in a more meaningful way.
Okay, any more comments or questions on this amendment? That being said, let's bring it to a vote.
Recorded vote, please.
Mr. Dhaliwal,
Even though, Mr. Chair, Madam Ramsey eloquently put forward, but I will be voting no.
Mr. Fonseca,
No.
Ms. Ludwig,
No.
Mr. Peterson,
No.
Mr. Sheehan,
Against.
Mr. Allison, no. Mr. Carey,
No.
Mr. Nuttall,
Nope.
Ms. Ramsey,
Yes.
amendment defeated.
Defeated. So we're going to go to, I think it's the last amendment with the NDP. We have here NDP 8.
Yes.
Go ahead, Ms. Ramsey.
Did you move that last? Oh, we're still in 5. Okay.
Yeah,
Okay.
we're still on clause 5-8.
All right. So I'll read this out then. This is again an addition after line 2 on page 4. So the addition 15.1.1, this act ceases to have effect on the day that is 2 years after the day on which this section comes into force, unless before the end of that day, the operation of the act is extended by resolution whose text is established under subsection 2, passed by both houses of Parliament. And number 2, the Governor and Council may, by order, establish the text of a resolution that provides for the extension of the operation of this act and that specifies the period of the extension, which may not exceed 2 years from the first day on which the resolution has been passed by both houses of Parliament.
Well, it's admissible, so if you have any more comments, go ahead.
Yeah. So again, there's been a lot of conversation about dispute resolution here, and certainly across the globe and every agreement that we're looking at, and most recently the USMCA, looking at the transparency of that process, what Canadians know or understand. Of course, we're very happy in the NDP to see the removal of ISDS in the new USMCA, that Chapter 11 is removed, because that was a secret tribunal and panel that existed that wasn't accessible to Canadians. And so, you know, I think that this really is an attempt to provide that transparency and to insist that the final report of the panels be published, instead, again, of the language, if they wish to publish. When we provide an opportunity for people to not be transparent, unfortunately, the result most often is that they aren't, that they don't provide the information because it's not actually a requirement. So if we're to continue the conversation that we're having around dispute resolution, whether we're talking ISDS or member to member, all the different ones that can occur in trade agreements, I think it's very important that we see an accounting of that, and that instead of having an option, that there is an actual publication of the dispute panels, of the disputes. And I would say too that this is also very helpful to companies, to small businesses, to labor, to be able to see and understand what disputes have been brought, and the ruling on those disputes really creates a path forward in how we can meaningfully address the issues that we have. And I can tell you, I just came back from the U.S. and there was a lot of discussion there about our Chapter 19. There was a lot of discussion about dairy and about diet-filtered milk, things that have been brought. Softwood lumber is still being discussed down there as a very serious issue for them. These things have been brought before two dispute resolution panels or through a dispute resolution process. But again, it's hidden. No one really knows or understands, unless you're a lawyer who's presiding over these things, or you're part of those arbitration panels. There really isn't a great understanding in the public of what dispute resolution is. And I can tell you, over the summer, a lot of people were asking me in my writing, why is it important to have Chapter 19? Because it was this, recurring theme in the new NAFTA that we had to have some form of dispute resolution. Well, why is that? And people are now asking, what is that? So I think if we are able to share and have a publication, that again, this would just be an attempt to have that transparency so that there's a general understanding in the public, but also as a benefit to our businesses, our SMEs, if they see a similar case, if they know that other things have been brought, if they have an interest in something that's being brought, it would really be a way to bring this to light and to have a national conversation about how we address issues and how we resolve them in trade agreements.
Well, thank you. And is there any more comments or questions on this amendment? Seeing none, let's bring it to a vote. Recorded vote.
Recorded.
Mr. Fonseca? Ms. Ludwig?
No.
Mr. Peterson? Ms. Sheehan? Mr. Sheehan? Mr. Allison?
No.
Mr. Carey?
No.
Mr. Nuttall?
No.
Ms. Ramsey?
Yes.
Okay. Amendments defeated. So that's it for the amendments. And so, shall Clause 5 carry? So that's it for Clause 5. Shall Clause 6 carry? Yes. So shall Clause 7 carry? Shall Clause 8 carry? Shall Clause 9 carry? Shall Clause 10 carry? Shall Clause 11 carry? Shall Clause 12 carry? Okay, that's it for the clauses, folks. So we're going to go, shall the schedule carry? Shall the title carry? Yes. Shall the bill carry? Yes. Shall the chair report the bill to the House? Today. Well, I don't know about today, but
Go ahead.
It'll be happening sometime. So that's it, I guess, for this. That's it for today's business. Just a little bit of a heads up. We had the next meeting was potential next Tuesday in case we need more time. That being said, we're not going to have a meeting next Tuesday. The next meeting we're going to have is Thursday the 6th, and that's going to be a draft report on Mercosur and a draft report on tariffs. Okay, that's it. So everybody, thank you officials for coming. It's been a big day. And have a safe trip. Anybody traveling home this weekend? Meeting adjourned.